visibility case.
Make the continents with just.
Yeah, just conditionality contradictions, visibility case.
All right, cool.
All right, everyone good? Contradictions against critical affirmatives are good. First is that our contradictions that we get to view it within a single vacuum, which means that we view each individual off case individually. First is the key to intellect because there's multiple options that we get to test against the philosophy. Second is education. We rarely debate critical affirmatives, which means that as long as we get value different types of depth, that means that we can get more critical education as a result of it. They say reinsurance is racism, but however I will already answer that on the critique. Second is that it checks potential winning out things we lose against new and tricky asks. When we're familiar, test multiple options, apply to research. Both sides have to do a wide range of arguments instead of relying on the same generic off case. Now, 3, flexibility. We have permanent familiarity and specific advantage to our grounds reactionary. 4, to AC economy efficiently. Finding offense that applies to both forward actions germane to the plan logic. The legitimate policies get attacked from left and right inquiry to vote for something worse than status quo. Applies is persuasive to AR outweighs tech, and when they can split 1, 2 in our slip of depth and level in the 2 in our bulk of education is in the research phase anyway. Straight turning has it anyway. Now, contradiction we can have 2 conditional off cases as long as they're contradicting that is the best check. Critique. Resistance is invincible. We'll never notice the change until it's already upon us. We already have been changed. A former Paul states that strategies for liberation never beats mass media advertising and other forms of co-option, space for the left, for effective political organization, space for the imperishable. The mundane habits of our existence can alter, so create a culture shift in how many do the job. The one he seeks resistance to what conservative politics force them to doing. The argument has changed for protesting the endless deferral of actions or statements of should be done. This debate around functions as a means to end creating an ideology resistant that subject outside of time that is never able to actualize agency in the local level. The only local space is left. Space is interceptable. There's claims to a social change against the exclusion prevents us from allowing the president enough to change it. This is Talcos, Atal 8. Empirical politics is to made by our sadness. The time forces the work of the president by training our senses to examine what appears evidence. Time can change the experience of the world, which has been rendered invisible. The sense of experience may be possible to realize is weight in the present historical regime and control. And empirical politics revolts in making the present by remaking our bodies the way we love, perceive, feel, loving. The present exists in the present. Empirical politics by the present doing it first. Details the refusal by perceptual instruments by representing the current political conditions and resisting the empirical politics without changing the conditions of perception, with changing what we see only bodily, live transformation, sufficient interruption, persuasive sensibility being a shape in sovereign power. They say a term that ignores racism, but that's the exact point. The case says as long as racism as the struggle for racism remains an invisible movement that will allow it to remain discreet without the elites trying to crush it. They say that results in white supremacy, but however the just recreates it being even worse. They say the orthography causes whiteness, but however, this is under the case header. The struggle for the 21st century politics is not a struggle oriented around race, rather it's a very complex race that come to inhibit and extreme radical politics. The affirmative deployment and concept of race focus on political struggle as smokescreen which smokes the dynamics of oppression. Darner and Torres for the problem of the 21st century race ideology served to obscure the whiteness that a contradictory ways function linchpin of racism forbids the other members of race. Speaking against races to radically refuse legitimate protectory radicalized democracy to rate the contest that a person's skin has been signified political should be come to function with that. We rather shout that the centralized population of racism and acknowledge complexity. The one we are not arguing for the colorblind conservative instead our analysis anchored in the century of race structuring hegemonic force with the disconnect from race. Second is that their politics reduces all struggles to a chain of equivalence. Their analysis power projection through the lens of race makes reducing injustice impossible. By making capitalism another part of the chain of equivalence of oppression rather than totalizing social system undermines oppression. This is Darner and Torres and for much literature has utilized races for analysis interpreting inequality, marginalization, the radical romantic media organization, superhero actions for democracy, social justice, for the blinding contradictory efforts, sustained greater domination of markets proliferated. This approach has seeped into multiple races. Ignore the periods by class discussion, racialized population, the critical race theory lacks the analysis of class and critique capitalism, race theories, intersectionality argument to refer to by race class. It is analytical capitalist system. One spheres have intersectionality distorted of corporation. The concept is unequivocal and anti-capitalist intent. The denial of totalizing forth capitalism class creation, the reducive in relation to its distinctive social process, ignore the fact that the identity results from the process of identification title, the legitimate conditions, the international intersectionality fails to eliminate market ad eliminate. They say that the debate is already opaque, but however, they defend spill over to all parts of the debate space and navigate within every part of the debate round. Second is that you must reject it. That's the point of the alternative. Not trying to take it to the street so that the elites can have knowledge about this. Now, groups are next. Their next two arguments saying that the model is imperialistic. That's exactly what we were trying to say. We're putting it as a link where they're trying to tie history and the real world to what we're having now. Identity movements worked in the '60s because the dominant form of centralized nation-state authority relying on control subject through exclusion. Their social change theory is out of date. That aggregates the sovereignty rely on breaking down borders. Now that was the Tolas Atal 8 evidence from the one in C, which means that this is already answered. They said permutation, but however we'll explain our alternative is so mutually exclusive. It's very clear. Voting negative means refusing to speak out on behalf of oppressed peoples, victims of exclusion. So on the one he sees 8-minute speech on behalf of them, which entails to protest the U.S. federal government exclusionary approach to transnational politics. Our alternative has nothing to do with this. Any permutation would be incoherent and including any element of the political strategy of the one he see only risk assured circling the radical potential alternative by protest visible. The invisible committee in 7. Stay invisible, put autonomy by the offensive to be visible, put in the option to be vulnerable leftists. All nations can only make more visible if immigrants only opposite by ought to. No leader, no organization to be nothing socially is no humility without some tragic lack of only contrary the precondition of maximum freedom of action. And on the case. Yes, Gabriel mentions that there's many advantages to the type of methodology and how it's not limited by geography. Many impacts to this. Second is first that you can cross by or dart in towards evidence that we read on the 1AC saying that capitalism is an overall structural claim, which means that none of these types of movements will be any sort of successful because there's too many other parts of social injustice as a result. Now here is more evidence. Third, the souls of the white folk, their view of power, the privilege, and the norm that possess ignores the process of constitutionality of identity. There's no coherent way for non-minorities to participate in the movement because they just can't take off their knapsack of privileges. This perpetuates exclusion and guarantees the failure of their movement. Order 5. Theorists say that whiteness is the norm, but the assertion by itself does very little further analysis to what they will work will make it difficult to function the unthinkable without white supremacist social system, without different ways of living. The holding on to a concept of power insists that the primacy of the sovereign subject by uncritically employs metaphors of possession. Whiteness studies implies that except for the political production as radical subjects works against its own state agenda. The account of every theorist work summed up the white privilege with that white power exercise power by exercising privileges the years of racism has put on for them. These sort of analysis can never lead to the account of maintenance white subjected by subject has white privileges, knapsack subject by King jettisoned without seriously altering its own composition. We hang on to the traditional concept of power. White theorists is stuck to 30 years ago white privileges testament how deeply stuck race theorists typically are. And fourth, the effect of the politics are far from being, despite the affirmative best intentions, they can only further entrench racism by deploying the concept of imaginary distinct race towards the end of the emancipation. Unfortunately, it's the very concept that underpins racism itself. Darting towards or one should follow the refused analytical identity of race. They refuse to be descriptive and explanatory concept of race has used to affect reconciliation with social knowledge as well. Academics who choose to write about race relations to use their legitimacy and reinforce the beliefs that species of different races by characterized by a combination of unreal physical marks when West seeks the American public and race matters market matters, which means that the key is only way that they perpetuate racism, and especially with their way of viewing it as the only cause, whereas things like capitalism are alternate causes.
Okay, so you say that contradictions are necessary to check the way out for flexibility and negligence, correct?
For negative flexibility, but our counter-interpretation is that we get to view it one step at a time.
But one. Your interpretation, in the one MC you said the role of the ballot was to who best creates best knowledge production. How is that a good production of knowledge then?
That's the point. We need multiple viewpoints against these types of affirmatives. They're rarely debated, so if we have...
Rarely debated, so you directly make performing contradictory arguments. Say that.
Well, second, I don't really see how this is contradictory in any way. It's a reason why your type of movement is bad. It's all racism turns. It's just a question of methodology.
Let me get this straight. This is now a capitalism critique, am I correct? No, how does capitalism function?
Somewhat.
What's the link to the app?
What's the link to the app? You try to bring the social movement out into the open by the judgment.
Bringing out social movements, how does that lead to capitalism?
It's a question that, it says that capitalism is so strong to the point where they will crush the social movement. The elites
So
will
capitalism will co-opt that movement, is that correct?
No, it's not saying it will co-opt, it will crush the movement.
Okay, so how, who's crushing our movement?
The
Brian Rubaie
elites that,
Is Brian like a commando from the elites?
Is he like a capitalist hack who's gonna crush our movement in this debate?
no, it's gonna be the elites outside of the Brown. You claim to
Okay.
spill over to every
Now,
single part of the debate.
How does Barack Obama know what I'm doing internally? How does he know what I learned in this debate?
I don't think that's relevant.
Why is it not relevant? Then who's crushing our movement? So
Uh,
what is the movement in the first place?
The movement is what your 1AC takes a stance on, claiming that we need to identify these.
Conscientization. How does a capitalist elite stop me from going epistemologically?
Because, well, not epistemologically, it's a question of whether the social movement will be successful as a result of the judge voting for it.
So they can't stop me from learning.
Like, it's a question of the method. Like, your type of method is going to
And the
fail.
alternative is not to speak out about race, right?
Yes,
Then where do we speak out against race?
in the invisible movement.
And where is this invisible movement?
The epistemology that we get from around that, like, we'll still learn about this affirmative even if the judge votes aye or
Alright,
nay.
so let's say you saw George Zimmerman about to shoot Trayvon Martin. Would you stop George Zimmerman even though it would get media coverage and you would be visible to the public sphere?
I
Would you
would-
stop that instance of racism even though it might become visible?
Even though it might become visible.
Yeah.
I don't see how it's an instance of racism. There were
No,
debates
you
over
say
whether
that
we
we should not,
self-defense.
we should not become visible. Why, like, is that a good point? Like, what would you do about that? How can we stay secret about those types of issues?
How can we stay secret about that? We read a card under your empiricism claim.
Wait, can we take cross-ex to finish the answer to this question?
Or present?
Alright.
So what do you do about that situation?
You should be present.
Alright, the Chino's ATOL evidence says that the politics is different from now, claiming that we aren't some nationalized state as we were back in the 60s, saying that
Okay,
they're
to
not.
answer that question, do you take action if George Zimmerman is about to shoot a black person and risk it being visible? Yes or no?
Risk it being visible?
Yes.
I don't think that's still relevant.
All right.
Alright, you have A53.
No, I'm good.
854?
A53.
853, okay.
Small paper.
Bring the paper down. Bring the paper down.
Oh wait, we'll take some more prep. Alright, that was 8 seconds.
So you have 740,
No, 7:38.
38.
Yeah.
What's the order?
The lawyer's gonna make a minute comments. Everyone ready? The role of ballot is for the team that has the best thought production. They organize their thoughts by continent. They base it off of Asianness, which uses the geographical notion of Asia that is flawed by Sir Lewis and Wiggins' evidence because it's not made by anything real, rather a blanket European term. There is evidence that we both come from. This is evidence that we both come from Asia, but radically different cultures, assumptions, and myths about who we are because of our race. These references to ideal minority don't make sense in a world where we reflect the referencing of such thing as Asia. We can agree with them that inclusion of individuals and judging individuals on their own merits is good, but that means we don't need to continually refer to people as just Asian. This term props up environmental determinism, which leads to racism because it creates the mental conditions necessary to create those stereotypes in the first place. Not only does this turn case, but the environmental determinism fuels other racisms, which should be viewed as an external impact of this critique. They increase the net amount of racism because this allows that type of thought production to be used anywhere else. For example, our crimes talk about Africa. I'm different from a Korean who's different from a Burmese who's different from me. They blanket all over Asian. They only talk about Southeast Asian, or they only talk about Asian, but they only talk, but they essentialize it. I am still Asian, but I don't get anything from this now. These East-West binaries are ontological in nature, affecting all runs of thought. They lie at the heart of militarism, nationalism, and equal development and misogyny. The fact that they criticize the West doesn't get them out of blink. They only recast and refine the binary due to O2. Binary categories include other oppositions. Traditional modernity, myth, and history, magical modern community, and the East and West have shaped out the normative apprehension of the past and key conception of cultures, the anatomies of representation of the West and its modernity, the overriding opposition to tradition, modernity, and East and West standard, variously discredited today. These oppositions continue to beguile and seduce the inhabit conservative understanding of radical vision, the native primitives, and anti-modernist apprehension. They always emphasize pervasive ontological dimensions embedded in the motivated part responsibly looking for remaking the world. The opposition lies in the heart of the dense civilization of the West, acute fabrications of race and reason without civilizing ambitions and colonies, cultures, and grandness and blueprints of third world and modernization. They shape and suture, emulsion, agendas, and multures, nationalism from Muslim peace from George Bush celebrities of Hindu and Islamic bomb and 18 false conflict critiques of Eurocentrics and imaginings. The West modernity often casts such dualities, producing distant veterans of tradition, community, and diverse reification, colony, and minority. Now, the case is not the one I see where we differ in our method view. Choose to solve this problem by continuing to generalize and form your thoughts around continents. It's a flawed model of thought because it is essentializing, as we said before, and causes further racism by problem of the way of thinking. They say they use the word Southeast Asian, but so it's not the same as Asian, but the labeling of subcontinent Southeast Asian should be rejected because of its ideological baggage. Lewis and Rick in 97. The principle for critical metaphor is neutral and nomenclature, avoidance of regional disengagement that carry out unpalatable ideological charge. The traditional European terminology is riddled and implicitly derogatory term. South Asia is still often slightly as a subcontinent Southeast Asia, reduced to Indochina and so on, but literally and also besides recently derived schemes around the term Middle East and military designation that is a military declaration that makes sense only from the perspective of Western European, while the name Latin America reflects the 18th century French original ambitions in Latin America. The Americas nomenclature analysis should certainly be on the agenda for critical metaography. They say they utilize it in a different way. They utilize it in a different way than what the K does, but he has not explained how they utilize it. Then their cards constantly speak of the Asians and the model they follow. Yes, I understand that this is what they critique. They critique that model, but they are unable to solve their problem because they continue the type of thing that propels the model that they are trying to solve. They also link to their other external impacts. Now he says that Cuba, Mexico, and Venezuela continents first, their countries. Two, our interpretation of framework is they engage in those governments that follow that follows all the policy-making education arguments made after. Governments are entities that actually exist, not over-essentializing names given to a massive group of people. Distinguished by continents. Framework is a gateway issue. It's a yes/no question. It shouldn't spill over to other often see there. Next, he says no link because they're Koreans, not just Asian Americans, but they still link because of the story they've been leading all of what I see is South Asian and Asian Americans. They may be Korean, but they choose to make them what I see revolve around the Asian model. Here's another link. Here's another link that actually. They say Asian is a myth on the model minority. Yes, I agree. We both agree that essentializing is bad, but you still fall into this trap through your use of the Asian grouping. The alternative is not worse with the myth. This went unexplained. Maybe it's just me, but it didn't make much sense in classics either. He said he has nothing to call himself but Asian. That's flawed, and that's a problem in this current thought process. His name is Gabe, not Asian. We should focus on things about who we are. Also, the alt was to reject cartographic ethnocentrism of the myth of continents, which is key to reform. This probably solves case better because it's able to move beyond the constraints of Asian and solves the myth of model better. Now he reads two cards that say the term Asian can be used for collective resistance because Europeans can't distinguish. And their card talks about how Europeans can't distinguish it, which means we should use that name. That is just falling under the trap of using the name, so which propels the type of model that they are trying to solve as bad. We shouldn't see it as a unifying base. We don't need to use the name to have a resistance. Your resistance should be against the world. It's the word itself because it's what essentializes in the first place. We are liable for our arguments, so don't think using the word Asian is a good idea. The rest of this was answered intuitively. Now he says perm, but that doesn't solve the impact still happen. And impact still happen and it doesn't solve anything. The rejection of the rejection of metaography must be systemic. The perm allows only geographical assumptions to creep back in. Lewis and Wiggins 97. Our guiding vision of basic spatial patterns of human society is clearly involved with the problematic consequences and never building human inquiry beyond consideration of geography. Metagraphy subconstitute ideological structures. There's no consequence that state changes in ideology or complete by questioning the metagraphic categories precisely because of their ideological power higher. Geography's ideas about distribution have proved remarkably tenaciously, although it may be recognized as application of concepts are inadequate.
Alright.
Stop to analysis.
8:53 for you all.
Right.
Oh, 8:50. Okay.
That one's marked to analysis.
Okay.
You already can tell me it's not ready.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
Okay. Actually, hold up.
alright.
8:41 now?
We'll take some.
No. Are they?
No, we just stopped her.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Are you taking part?
No.
Here. Case. Framework. What was that on? Cartography, visibility, myth of continents, whatever it is.
That was before invisibility, right?
Yes, visibility is the last.
case studies still drop the impact of the myth of the modern, impact the myth of the modern causes psychological violence against Asian Americans, specifically Korean Americans, Chinese Americans, all others have immigrants within Asia. It also causes the homogenous black culture poverty because these people are used to justify the oppression of other minorities because the white supremacists point to our people. Yeah, like, why can't you be like them? It causes the maritime diseases that causes psychological violence. The two case studies right doesn't make much sense because white people can't join our movement's internal process. That's what conscientization is. That is a big distinction that will get us very far within the rest of this debate because conscientization is an internal process, something that is different for every single person, something that does not redefine or homogenize right. Hey, you are voting for our methodology, not our performers. But there's a reason why you can still vote out even if they win a couple of the links on Christian. The last argument does not make sense. The race talk argument about the answer. Divisibility came, not the framework arguments. You have dropped the straight from suicide debate. We are better on suicide debate. That's all the reflexivity. That's all your one or global warming evidence nonsense that you talk about. But this was a straight from argument coming out of suicide because our model is one that promotes the different types of engagements. Sometimes it doesn't say good, sometimes it doesn't say bad. We're the only one who's self-reflexive, which means that we solve this better, independent, net better to our performance, and this after theirs because they've never taken the position taken that you actually find on the bad. Now the myth of the conscious argument. The biggest distinction of the myth of the conscious argument is that there's a difference between identity and a name. The name we choose for ourselves is Asian, except our identity is something more fundamental, something different. This one's reflecting the narrative. When I say that other people know us as Centennial KK, my mother knows us as QB, those are fundamental ideas that we have gone through the country. The reason why we don't link to this, we don't make these arguments. This doesn't turn the case because first of all, what the hell is environmental determinants? No explanation for the impact. For the specific impact on the environment. They don't find according to our state's explanation. He says that to criticize the West is not enough. We criticize the West is perfectly not enough because the term Asian is used to recognize that there's difference within Asian races. The term is malleable and it's not definite. It's used when it's used by the dominant group is bad, but when Asians use the term as a term of empowerment because it's a way to build coalitions. There's a big difference because all their cards in the context of white supremacy using Asians. We are not white supremacists and our performance made that very clear. The other framing issue for this argument is that they have no alternative. The alternative that she intimidating crossing is a big mistake because it says to identify based on skills. Guess what happens when we identify by our skills? That's caused by the model minority myth to part trade because the way that Asians are defined in the cycle is with the skills, which the right use is just by the pressure of other minorities. The piece of the challenge of it to be with this way because when the Asians are used as scar, they recognize that the myth is inaccurate unless us unite between groups, which is a fundamental difference between our performances. Now, the contradiction argument, this is where you actually mess up because the role of balance is good knowledge production. You are a bad form of knowledge production because you have a direct contradiction. This is also starting to take us to this criticism because when you say Cuban, Mexico, Venezuela, and the United States, you try to refer it only to the governments because, oh, well, where are these governments? These governments are in the country that you try to combine them, which is the reason why you link to their own criticism, the reason why you can't go there with the criticism. Also, the impact of this contradiction argument is white supremacy, completely dropped by the negative lie. By not having screws together, this will negative that because the only way the white supremacy becomes all encompassing and using these contradictions to try to subvert different groups. Okay, some of the ideology is better. This ideology is further entrenched by negative when they say things like negative flexibility for white supremacy, the type of education that they garner, the research skills and the negative flexibility, the critical thinking, logic arguments are all logics of white supremacy. The reason why we impact all the fairness arguments, the athletics arguments don't get you anywhere because this is not a theory argument. This is something argument that ignites your performance. Not going to visibility criticism. Another thing they will talk about the visibility criticism is first example permutation. The permutation is not sound because we don't know what the hell the permutation does. It's an internal process that's consistent with conscientization. It is secret, which is why some games to shut up when you try to explain it within the 2AC, which is the reason why you cannot tell this friend sovereign, but since conscientization is an internal process, it does not sever our methodology. The reason why it's the office, the first time all this argument amounts to race doctrine. He's a whole of seven and white and Christ evidence that we always need to take a voice of visible stance of white supremacy because they cannot answer the quasi question without white supremacy, even though it risks being visible. That is the uncomfortable and the reason why white supremacy happens within status quo. The piece of Christ evidence says that if we don't do that, it becomes a norm, which is why we have to make it visible. Even though our arguments was pretty much dropped because they're invisible coming to the epitome of it's the epitome of the white it's for epitome of the view for nowhere. The impact of the view for nowhere is just special loss. The impact of the view for nowhere is that you speak the behalf of others, not the person's experience that causes the demonetization and race oppression. The myth of the outline thereby not identity politics is good. Post identity politics peak. That's Ross in 2000. Brad did on the shirt post identity world came back fast post identity politics difficult in world where so we try to move from mass identity politics. What's the generation we sports? We know race compare. How do we tell the gender advance economic justice? We lobby those in their own neighborhoods while we're still deciding by race class such a national question on the national of politics here. The issue that identity politics and the do those who are relevant off-field communities can forget that we are adding something anytime the range of coming into the class will clash analyze to racially segregated groups in the working class. Now the alternative fails to build coalitions and leads to racial oppression. Ross in 2000. Blacks and voters ought to go out of class. Private people left as I reflect the instance of racialization. Ours and marketing and possible make a precise appeal given to the interest of working on the woman of men who are regardless of what always any is more than part of it, economics, water cars, and finally said argument that today is not a secret. There was specialized argument the skills that we gain is invisible to the outside world. Meaning why we don't lead to the grade. Finally he said the post evidence is the reason why even if we're visible, at least the real estate is supposed to gain because the post evidence indicates that these are the beautiful struggle. We're visible in their performance when they make, but they still the social chains that haven't had equality yet. You are using the content of past white supremacy, not us.
Alright, we have 738.
You got anything for me?
We do have one right here. Do you guys have our cards for my turn? One
I actually gave them right there.
This?
There, go.
There, that's what it is.
Hey. Was the part with Stephanie in the last speech?
Which one?
The one on domestic confidence.
Your back content? No.
No, yeah.
Was there any voting issue?
Neither. Contradictions on the defendants. All right.
Always a voting issue.
Yeah. The order will be beds of contents, framework, visibility case, and no new cards, just
So myth comment, framework, visibility case.
Yep.
Alright, I'm ready.
All right. Everyone ready? All right. The use of the label Asia and Asian are only served to reinforce an environmental determinism, which is the root cause of all their implied claims. Using this model props up the Western Eurocentric notion that geography that facilitates the racism. The only way the 1AC makes any sense is that we associate Asians with Asian, and that to be associated draw upon the memories that they create. Now, they have conceded that only people can still have their type of advocacy to resolve racism, but without any type of labeling of that of a continent, which is why the alternative can solve back to the case. Now, we have an external impact that is distinct from white supremacy that Michael keeps on repeating many times, which is the fact that we have environmental determinism, which is already outlined in our Lewis and Wiggin 97 evidence, saying as long as we try to do all this cartography with continents, that will only reinforce environmental racism, because we want to try to regroup any types of people, and that will just perpetuate violence, which is a net increase in racism, which is just a net benefit to the alternative, which is the reason why you should vote for us. It's against the model of Asia because it reinforces that model and generalizes it. Now, they conceded the due evidence from the 1R, which is very good, saying that these binary categories only reinforce this racism and causes that modernization and militarism as seen by George Bush, and causes bombing within indigenous populations, which is what only reinforces the model. Also, JRE emphasizes this example, saying how she is Indian, but she lives a completely different lifestyle. But they are grouped in the same type of model as the yellow people that the 1AC tries to put it. There's no identity politics, which is reasons why they can't access it. They say there's a distinction between identity and name of the country, but however, Crossex says that Michael is from the continent of Asia, which makes it distinct, which is reasons why you link back. You say there's no link because there's environmental determinism. That's only impact defense. Plus, it's already described on the O2 card. They say Asian is just still white collation, and they can solve back whatever is a question of discourse. Plus, you still overgeneralize the same way that you put the Indian Americans and the Chinese Americans together. Now they extend their Chow evidence, but however, it's still linked because it still unifies the cultures by putting them all under one property of Asian Americans, which is still another link. Now, they say contradictions are bad because Cuba and Venezuela. First, you can extend the counter-interpretation, saying that we compartmentalize that because that's the best way for education, since we rarely debate critical affirmatives, which is best for education. Second is that we said that framework was a gateway issue, and the 1R saying that as long as they pass the gateway, that was good enough. This was the only type of theory that this was the only type of theory that was extended. Second is that our link is only about Asia, and it's only about continents. Also, you conceded that the government that they self-represent each other by government names and not by country names. You cannot go for this as a reason why it will already happen. Now they say that it has an impact on white supremacy, but I will get to why the case cannot even solve that anyway. Now they have no reason why excluding the word Asian is bad, which means it's only a risk of offense for us, which means you can just vote neg on presumption inevitably. We have a greater impact there. There's only risk that only more racism is bad through the electoral process. Now on a framework. Now yes, we'll concede that. Yes, we try to follow their methodology, which is reasons why we don't link back to any of this. Fairness in education was not extended on framework, which means that all their social reforms are going to fail. Now all the internal links to social progress on framework is already going to be trumped on case. Now visibility critique. I can see the permutation. I'm not going for it. He only reads reasons why identity politics is good, which means that you get your movement. Being invisible or visible is still fine. It's just a question of the methodology. Now case, yes, we will concede that that's all about is who has the best methodology to break down this type of racism. But that's the reason why the critique can still turn. Second is that we already had that emphasized above, saying this type of cartography only causes it to be flawed because of the world because of the word Asian when they unify different populations, which is the reason why the movement fails. Second is that we also have our reasons from the invisibility critique. Our Darner towards evidence was conceded, saying that the category race is completely ununified, saying that white supremacy is inevitable because of things like capitalism making social injustice literally impossible. Second is that we also read a McWhorter evidence saying that the white privileges as norms make it a flawed understanding that they can't really break down. Which means that we also access white supremacy as well as a net increase of racism and an external model, which is that of environmental destruction based off the cartography that was already in our JERC, that was based off our JERC evidence. They say that there's no alternative. However, there's no impact to that. Rejection is still key. Our Turner and Morris evidence from the one in R is sufficient enough on reasons why rejection is still key, independent of their advocacy.
I had the 841.
Yeah, 841. Sorry.
Yeah.
actually need it.
Still looking some good.
You will sign your ballot act because voting negative means 1, you protect conscientization, 2, you stop using the word Asian but perpetuate the myth of the model minority, 3, you continue psychological violence against Asian Americans. Again, the 2 Americans continue that the myth of the model minority perpetuate psychological violence against Asian Americans because they are always swept under the oppression is invisible, that me as a Korean cannot speak out against oppression because we are not seen as legitimate enough there. We don't get educational welfare help because we are seen as already having to escape the grasp of racism. Also, the myth of the model minority causing the oppression of other minorities, causing the mediocrity, putting the blame on them. Now, the line conscientization is an internal process that is different for every person. We have Telebaptist since the 2AC. I do not know what cartography means, that we don't get to have our epistemic role and why that is style falls our movement, because it's an internal movement that cannot be crushed by just having a cartography or using the word Asian American, because our epistemology is still from these capitalism arguments don't make sense. You have conceded the process that we can use our identity to break down these capitalism notions, even if it doesn't. Why does that mean conscientization fails, and why does that mean the knowledge we gain from this round is a bad one? Because capitalism is not you are not going to co-opt that movement, or you do not stop that. These white privilege arguments were not articulated to it, or I don't know why that stops conscientization, because it's still broken away from that white privilege and breaking down the beast of the minority now. The rule of ballot, which was a competing methodology for that knowledge production, isolated in the one and two. The negative does not have their own methodology. If it's a floating paper, then that's a methodology of conscientization. It means you have all factors on your ballot, because that is our methodology. We have to isolate it, debate further critique. First, the link to be is going to be identity versus name. Our name may be Asian Americans. However, our identity is something different that we isolate. Just because we use the word Asian Americans, does not mean it's essentially one. That you have to look at our narrative, look at the story we paid about Mexico. Guess what? We use the word Koreans. We use our identity. We use Asian Americans to speak of that group. But when it plus, we use specific identities such as Korean Americans too. It's a unifying identity because it's links harmony experience such as immigration or domination by the myth of the monomonomy. The term itself as a ball and available for the diversity within it, which means that their notion of Asian American is outdated, outdated and still in the 60 moves. Now they have to see the uniqueness level of the debate that the status quo that Asian Americans are already essential, like that the only way that people view Asian right now are through their skills as the hardworking minority, that they are always going to come out and pull themselves out of trouble for racism. However, however, the negative is not actually what we should use all of the Asian Americans using these skills, just essentially Asian Americans as even more just as the minority that is hardworking, that is intelligent, that keeps on getting the good grades. The alternate does nothing about that. That means that right now there's a essentialism in this that will only go through a process of conscientization is able to solve, because it gives us a ability, names who we are, names it's a constant clarification who we are, and to solve for that malleability in the term Asian American, which means that the critique is entirely solved by the process of conscientization. Also now this goes to line by line. First is the environmental determinism argument. So there was no explanation what environmental determinism is. Why using geography? Why using the word Asian American? There's no threshold for this impact because the two did not do any impact analysis or impact calculus, which means you cannot give it to it. If we don't use the word Asian American, what does it replace? Do we use the word Korean? Do we use the word Chinese? What you cannot hang your hat on some impact you do not know, or some alternative you do not know. So vote for preferred meaning. Also using the word Korean, China style, probably using geography. Which means I don't know what the threshold for this impact is. The floating pig argument was answered on the case that it's still a process of conscientization, even if it's a floating pig, which means you automatically vote for it. Also, they have not isolated what they would use other than Asian American, which means that they still link to all the still into the myth of the minority argument, and also the unifying experience why the term Asian American is good. Now they're binary mile answer here. The China business specifically, that's why Asian American is a unifying identity, because not a white supremacist. When white supremacists use the word Asian, yes, it might be dominant. However, when Asians use the word Asian American is a strategic identity, because also Asians can identify between each other. Asians can figure out what makes us diverse. However, white supremacists cannot distinguish and cannot divide and conquer and cannot stop epistemic growth. So therefore, using the term Asian American is a shield that stops white supremacists from co-opting the binary arguments do not make sense, because that's exactly what we break that through the myth of the monomonomy, or the myth of the monomonomy perpetuates the binary, saying as like a homologous culture that we are able to solve these questions. These questions do not make sense. Now the contradiction argument is where he messed up. These characterization compartmentalizing does not solve for you knowledge production, because we say compartmentalizing and using several identities is what whiteness used to avoid the discussion about race. When we critique one of your identities, you just move to another one, trying to avoid the discussion, avoid the discussion. This is an impact by the not-very increasing argument, which is that white supremacy uses the contradiction. So my framework is not a gateway issue, it's the representation you have put up in the debate. Also, these theory arguments do not make sense in the context of what your knowledge production, which you said the role of the ballot was. Your knowledge protection is a contradictory one that supports the white supremacists. It's another reason why the alternative cannot solve it. You have to vote affirmative.
Also,